Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, August 19th. Welcome to this week's edition of the Superpower Logic podcast. I'm your host, Richard Swank, joined by Kelly Jordan, as always. Um, it's been an interesting week with primaries and some of the comings and goings with the DSA. Um, it got Kelly and I talking about uh, education in America and exactly who is supporting the DSA candidates, where their ideologies are coming from, and what can be done to uh, educate our younger generations of Americans on the dangers of DSA and their ideas. And Kelly's going to take it away from here. And I'm looking forward to this conversation because I don't think we agree on everything. Kelly and I usually are pretty in line on things. So I'm looking forward to this conversation and debate.
Well, hi, Richard. Thank you. I will start by saying education is it's become a passion of mine. I didn't my background, none of my background was finance. I worked it prior to getting a job at my son's school. It's a private Catholic school. I had no background in education. But between working there, and then I also had to work in coordination with our local public school district, which is in upstate New York, and helping my son through some some struggles. Learning comes differently or easier to some kids, better than others. I feel like I learned a lot about the education system, and if I would say in general, I would kind of describe it as there's many things it's lacking. um, so I guess I'll I'm going to start by sharing an example I found, and that I did share with Richard that I just believe does a good job summarizing um, the reality of a good example of some of the crazy things that have happened, been allowed to happen in the education system. So I'm going to pop up. This is a public school in the Chicago school systems, and there's a X post here, and it highlights just some of the uh, just just some good examples of the way things shouldn't be working. So this is the Frederick Douglass Academy in the Chicago City School District, and it, it was built to hold 47 classrooms to serve over 1,000 students. But right now, there's only 27 students enrolled, 27 students, and the school employs 28 full-time staff. So at a 3% utilization, it's the emptiest big school in the country. A few more quick facts. 100% of seniors are categorized as chronically absent, meaning they miss 10% or more. No 11th grader could read or do math at grade level in the 23-24 school year. And if you divide the cost to run it by the number of students, it's $93,000 per student per year. And actually, I have to give credit to this Austin Berg, who has been highlighting some of the issues and the madness in Chicago. And if you click through, I'm just using his Substack post here, and we'll link it just to give you a little bit of an idea about here we can get into. Chicago is unfortunately not the only school, major school district to be operating these basically empty buildings. In Philadelphia, San Antonio, New York City, and Columbus, and really and I just kind of scrolling through here to highlight that the issue is it's larger than just larger than just Oh, sorry, it clicked through here. And we'll put all these links in. But I just, again, it's to highlight the ridiculousness of operating a school like that, that is underperforming. And to get back to kind of the larger issue, this is the reality is the unions are fighting to keep schools like this open. I would argue that Chicago Chicago Public Schools is more of a jobs program right now than it is an education system based on uh, what the chokehold that I believe the union has, teachers union has on the schools in Chicago. And the sad reality is these are the students that have the least resources at home, right? Their communities probably have the least resources as far as like recreational centers, activities, sports, and these are, the families in the nice suburbs of Chicago. If the schools aren't good, they send their kids to private school. And not only is it ludicrous to be operating these schools at such a cost, the performance of the students in Chicago public schools continues to decline. And while all of this is happening, the union has negotiated themselves um, with the state and the city a guaranteed benefits paid out, even though at its current trajectory, the teachers' pension fund for the Chicago public school teachers is insolvent, meaning they don't have enough money coming in to cover what they have going out. So I don't know, Richard, what do you think of this example?
Well, I'm not surprised by it at all. Um, I think the majority of our large cities in America, their public school systems have serious problems. And we, for whatever reason, are so behind and unwilling to accept the realities of public education challenges in America. I think a large part of that is the teachers unions and the vast differences in wealth. There are outstanding public schools in America. Um, there are, but they're for the most part they're not um, in the heart of our large cities. They're in suburbs. They're certainly in small and medium sized towns. Um, but we have to get away from this idea that money will fix education.
Yeah.
To me, throwing money at the school systems, which is really just throwing money at the teachers' unions, has not worked uh, for decades now. And when you look at what happened in Mississippi with the Mississippi Miracle and how students are doing there, their proficiency in reading and writing and arithmetic, that's a blueprint
Yeah.
for success. And I do not have the data right in front of me, but I'm sure that Mississippi is not spending that kind of money per student like the
No,
Chicago public school system is.
no,
And
they're
and
not.
yeah, and everybody that's trying to fix the public education system in America, or everybody in Washington D.C. that's trying to fix the public education system in America, the political class, their kids go to private schools, and they go to private schools for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think there's just a lot of hypocrisy. This is an issue that involves race, wealth, um, gender, and and our unwillingness to adapt or have these difficult discussions is criminal in my opinion. And of course, COVID only made it worse and even more of a challenge. And I'm gonna be kind of kind of throw a hand grenade in this, but I'm very much for vouchers and funding the students versus these school systems, and that these public school systems need to be stress tested and their existence and how many students they can have, the size of their classrooms, that needs to be constantly evaluated. We talked earlier in this, when our podcast started, about credentialism.
Yeah.
And I think one of the real challenges, Kelly, with education is that the teachers' unions and the education administrators in America have this idea that the bar for understanding education is so high and that you need to trust us and leave us alone to do it. And don't listen to your ears. Don't trust what you're seeing. Don't trust what your children are saying. Um, and that's absolutely um,
Yeah.
crazy to me that parents, you do not have to be this has been a problem for so long, and so it's somewhat human nature that, well, it's been around for a long time, that must mean it's complex, and if it's complex it must mean that the solution has to be complex too, and
It,
I just don't see that as the case.
it didn't, it had, I mean, the problems though with our education system for like hundred and however many years, 150 plus or more, we didn't really start to kind of see the decline in performance. I mean, some of it is if it's not measured, it's not managed. So it would be hard to say, exactly. Um, but there was
Where
a
did
period
that Can I
where
ask you a question?
yeah,
Where did that come from if it's not measured or it's not managed?
I'm not sure
Because
why.
that seems to be unique to education, but I feel like teachers unions, they push back on uh, these metrics on a regular basis.
Yeah. And before I forget, while you were mentioning Mississippi, right? I want to compare them to New York quick for numbers because Mississippi or New York spends the most per pupil. And we're going to do two things. I'm going to report from the 2024 NAEP, which is a federal, it's like the nation's report card. It's a federal test given to all states and students at certain ages and grades. This is what allows us to compare one state to another or one state over time because states they do perform their own state testing, but they can change the test, manipulate the way they grade it. And every time they change their standards, it becomes a new test. So it's difficult going off state tests alone. So um, New York spends about 2.8 times, or Miss New York spends about 2.8 times Mississippi on per pupil spending. So I think I had the numbers for 2024 in front of me. And New York on average spent 31,918 per pupil, and Mississippi spent 12,324 per pupil. Now, New York's has actually gone up dramatically since 2024. Last year, the statewide average, so for the 25-26 school year, was like 37,000. New York City was like 42,000 per pupil. I think Mississippi's was like 13,000. But so again, and this 2024, we'll use those numbers, 32,000 versus 12,300. Okay. Then if you use their NAEP, the federal test results, and they do fourth grade, eighth grade. So we're just going to look at fourth grade and eighth grade math results. Mississippi's average was, or Mississippi's score, 219. New York's was 215. So Mississippi scored higher, and this is fourth grade reading, and ranked ninth nationally. New York was about the average. In grade four math, Mississippi, 239. New York, 234. So again, Mississippi outperformed New York. You get into, it's a little different. So grade eight, in New York edges out here. 200, New York scored 257, Mississippi 253. So New York is slightly ahead. And for math grade eight, New York's 271 to Mississippi 269. So, I mean, pretty close. But when you consider the fact that Mississippi only a few years before was like last in the nation.
And NAEP
So,
is NAEP is NAEP, the National Assessment of Education
Yeah,
Progress, also
yeah,
known as the nation's report card, right?
yeah. And that's
Okay.
the federal test given. Because many states only want to bring attention to their individual state tests, but they control those tests, right? And because the tests don't ask the same questions every year, they get to weight the difficulty. So they routinely weight like in New York State, the bar to meet proficient continually gets lowered. So that's why a good way to compare state to state or one particular state against its history is to use this federal test. So
Do
for
you think it's a
two,
good test? Do you think NAEP is
um,
a good program?
I right now it's the best we have to compare. It's done biannually. So the students this last spring, 2026, took another test. The results will come out. They'll be coming out hopefully by December. So we'll see. Right now, and we have historic record of it, it's the best way to measure. Um, it's just the absolute best way to measure performance. A lot of this came out of No Child Left Behind. And for as much as people hate on No Child Left Behind, it did do some good things. And the intention behind it was very good. And a lot of it came out of what Bush did in Texas. And he made some massive education reforms in Texas and improved the education. Unfortunately, the I don't want to sound too conspiratorial here, Richard, but the educational thought leaders, right, um, can largely be found in high up in academia and insulated institutions, um, and with uh, with unchallenged ideas and beliefs. And we have seen in the last few decades the introduction of curriculum and teaching methods that actually do not align with the way human brains learn. Um, they are come largely out of some communities in England in the 60s. And this idea that if you just expose children to books long enough, right? And just words, they'll eventually learn to read just like they learn to talk. The issue with that is learning to speak, which humans have been doing, like verbally communicating for millions of years, right? Versus the written language, which is relatively new in the last maybe 10,000, 15,000 years, uses two completely different processes of the brain. So, despite knowing these new curriculums are failing, right? We're in a reading crisis. Never, at no point in history have we been passing or graduating students who can't read more than we have today. So, despite knowing the results are getting worse, we're not making big, we're not in there changing, reversing some of these bad policies. And if anything, we're we've kind of removed, I don't want to get in too much detail because it can be boring, we get in the weeds, but we used to always, it was standard reading, writing, we'll call it ELA, math, science, civil, like history, social studies, some civil education too, right? Civics education. And we've now kind of consolidated down, especially at early elementary, where most of it gets lumped under ELA and or math. So we know our performance is getting worse. The teachers' unions have a stronger chokehold on many of these schools. The curriculum's not working, and we're teaching philosophies like cultural relativism. So our students learn that no no culture can be judged against each other or better than another. So I think, fast forward downstream of some of this is a bunch of kids who are believe in the DSA's program and don't have the context of socialism.
So what is at its minimum? Okay, I'm going to look at this from a different perspective. Um, what is the standard uh, when you walk out of high school in America as an 18-year-old? I look at it as a training program. When you walk out of basic training in any branch of the armed forces, there are certain things you have to do. I don't care what your job's going to be. If you're a Marine, you have to, everybody has expectations with weapons. For example, you have to qualify on weapons. For one thing, there's physical fitness requirements. All these things. When you walk out the door with your graduation, with your diploma in high school in America, at the 30,000 foot level, what do you think the the bare minimums that a kid should have when they graduate high school, no
Me,
matter where they live?
like my personal beliefs, or
Yeah.
I would say, excuse me, at a minimum, kids need to be able to read, right? Read, right? Um, and comprehend uh, that they basically, if you get to third grade and you're behind in your reading, you have like less than a 5% chance of ever catching up. Um, but me personally, I read, write, comprehend. You should be able to read, in my opinion, again, one of the classics, novels, history, understand it, comment on it. I think math wise, and I'm just really kind of high level because I've never been asked specifically. Uh, so I'm kind of thinking on the spot here. I think you should have learned American history, to a certain degree, world history. Um, I think our schools should be generating students who are educated in the first principles of America, right? And and students um, who don't learn, like there should be none of this. Uh, we were colonizers. The white man was bad, right? We we
Yeah,
fo-
we
we got to focus on our mistakes we made, absolutely. But when our founders intended the educational system, Thomas Jefferson was like he thought a lot about this. And but most of our founders realized that our form of government, Republican form of government, citizens governing essentially themselves, it was more important than ever that you basically had virtuous citizens. Um, and and for the first 150 years, they used these daily readers and religion and religious morals was fully interwoven into the education system. And it was done at a local level. So I'm getting a little sidetracked here, but math, absolutely. You should have mastered your math facts. You should have memorized basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, division facts. You should be introduced. You should be taught finance classes, right? Interest, compounding interest, how it works for you, how it works against you. I think we should bring back some of the more basic skills, like, they used to have shop, right? Um, we should be absolutely learning about investing in the stock market, tax basics. you, and you should understand science, certain scientific principles. At a minimum, exposed to enough that one could determine what they're interested in. Um, but ideally, you're graduating loving your country, right? Having an affinity for it, believing that, um, you're in a special place and knowing its history. And what is it? New York Times has written, it used to be a sixth grade level. I'm not sure what it is now. But at a minimum, you should be able to read anything in a newspaper, read it, understand it, comprehend it, be able to summarize it, and report back to someone what it said. You should be given the tools. So there's this idea called cognitive load theory, which means our brains only have so much like computing power at once. So if students don't have their basic addition and multiplication math facts memorized, which we all used to have, when they go to algebra or any sort of higher level math, if they can't, they're reading an equation and in it, it says, 2 times 7 as part, like in parentheses with all the other stuff. If they have to stop, get a calculator out to do 2 times 7, the whole equation is going to be difficult for them.
Yeah, so I think I would completely overhaul the requirements for this system. I
Oh,
think
totally.
I would say you need to be able to read, write, and do basic math at a certain level.
Yep.
And then way more importance on reading and writing than the math part. I don't know how much math I took in high school, but everything I did in high school from a math perspective was so that I didn't have to take it in college. I clept out of everything I could because I hate math. To this day, I hate math. And outside of basic math, I've never had to use arithmetic in my adult life. Now, that being said, I don't discount that it's not important. And the option to pursue math in high school at a higher level, I don't think you need to take it all the way through, but you do need to be able to pass a basic standardized test, I think, to graduate high school in America. I think,
But what about like maybe we don't teach kids like, you don't have to remember the quadratic equation, but a lesson in interest, compounding interest,
well, that's
right?
my point. So, like, personal finance needs to be a requirement nationwide. Um, I think all the other, the any philosophy, history, et cetera, I think that needs to go far more to a broader category of critical thinking. Can you critically think about events of the past, what that means for the future? The old adage, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. Um, I think a lot of current studies in America can be lumped into the critical thinking. And I don't know how you put a metric on that. I certainly don't have all the answers. But my final thing before you walk out the door, whether you're in Alaska or Florida or New York or California, is I think everybody needs to pass a citizenship test.
Yep. Make
Maybe
civics
a
again.
maybe a citizenship test on steroids. Since but I think it should be a requirement for graduating from high school. I don't think you have to. Not everybody's going to have levels of patriot. Not everyone's levels of patriotism are going to be the same, right? But um, but part of I think of like a citizenship test, and I'm not going to pretend like I know all the questions when you immigrate to America. I was born and raised here, but I know that a lot of um, Americans who were born in America don't do well on the citizenship test, and
Yeah.
so I definitely it makes my ears hurt when I see I don't know, it's like Jesse Waters sometimes, or Jay Leno used to do it when he was on the Tonight Show. What are the three branches of the government? And people are like, Republican, Democrat. And I mean, they can't even, it's embarrassing.
It is. It's
And
ludicrous that
it
we
is.
in
It's,
America that we
but
and maybe let me clarify with patriotism. If maybe it's more you have to learn the principles of America, our government, our what we were founded on, what makes us unique. Uh, and because there's a danger in uneducated, uninformed citizens voting, right, that controls the whole masses. And when I say uninformed, I want to clarify so I'm not sounding like um if you don't even understand what like laws and whatnot, if you don't even understand like how our system works, how can you vote on changing it?
well, that's a fair point. I was, when you look at walking out the door of high school, um, I think there's we talked about personal finance, filing your taxes. um, is is another example. Some basic life skills. I'm all for shop. Even people that go to college, I'm all for shop. Uh, Basic life skills around the house are fantastic. You shouldn't have to call a plumber for every minor problem, but again, so I'm all for that as well. Um, when it comes to understanding America and everything, I totally agree with you there. What I have a problem with is this idea that the answer is only in schools,
Yeah.
particularly public
Oh,
schools, because
yep.
because there's so much, and I'm not. Public schools have a purpose. The federal government does not have a role in that purpose. I think public education is best done locally at
Yes.
the highest level, a state. Um, I know like NAEP exists for the federal government as part of the Department of Education to give some type of keep a scorecard, if you will. I think it's called the nation's scorecard or
Yeah. The nation's report card.
nation's report card. Thank you. I'm in uh, yeah. So, and that's all well and good, but I would also argue that the needs of students in New York City versus the needs of students in
Hmm.
Jackson, Mississippi. Yes, they all need to know how to learn how to read and write and do math. There is some commonality there, but it also, it divests at some point, and that's where I think the local aspect of education is so important. And
Yes.
and I wish that the federal government, it'll never happen because Congress won't do it, but I wish that we would eliminate the education department and
Yeah.
go back to how we operated in the 50s. Because
Yeah.
all of our education metrics, I don't care what state it is, they've all gone down since the education department was created.
Yeah. And excuse me, sorry, got allergies, but and it was Jefferson, among others, really promoted this view. In Jefferson's perfect world, education would be done by the public, but it would actually be like taught by parents. So, we'll take Virginia, would have been broken down into like super local wards, he called them. And parents would have been responsible for delivering the education because um, his point was if you give the ultimate responsibility to the parents, um, the parents will be going through an education twice, right? And they will be better citizens. So you'll constantly be. That was just one of his ideas, but he saw it again. It had to be local, right? It had to meet the needs of the area. To your point, the issues with in a city maybe are very very different. Um, but I uh, I
Well, there
will
are,
say,
go ahead.
oh, I will say that for the first like 150 years or more, we had these readers, and they were instructions on, it was learn to read, like how to read, but they were all stories that like they were our history, right? This is where George Washington, the cherry tree, chops down came from. But it was only in 1940s that it was as recent as 1940s that we really separated any sort of religious or common law, which common law is kind of based on religious morals, and our education system. Up until that point, the idea of, education should be synonymous with um, good citizens, right? Just the idea, look out for your neighbor, don't steal. That sort of aspect was also baked um, into the education system.
Well, and I think that's probably where we, you know, maybe diverge a little bit. I'm not
I'm
opposed.
just saying that my point was I'm not saying bring God back into the school. I'm not
I know.
necessarily that's even possible. Um, but uh it I guess up until recently, it was viewed. it was viewed as, I guess, educating the youth. It was this idea that even um, there was a connection between morality, right, and education.
So that's where we definitely diverge. I'm a very black and white education person. I believe that local and state entities should come up with standards. I don't care how you get to the point where that test gets passed, whether it's homeschooling, public schools, charter schools, private schools. It needs to get to that point where we have a off the shelf productive 18-year-old citizen. Um, that's my main point in all of this. When it comes to um, cultural things, well, I agree. Some of the things that are taught in schools today, the classroom environments are ridiculous, and they're obviously left leaning. But I would say the same thing if they were right leaning. And I don't. That's the job, I believe, of families, of parents and siblings and grandparents to help shape one's moral character and foundation. Now, schools do play a part in that. Schools teach discipline, they teach responsibility, they teach, or they're supposed to at least do those things. Teach being on time, teach not to talk back, interaction with authority, all these good things, right? But we are so focused is as a the education establishment and um, the political nature of education. We're so focused on the how instead of just the what. And that's where again it gets back to the teachers and the unions, and because not all public schools have problems, and public schools, you can't compare the problems of Douglas High School in Chicago, which you started our pod off with, or to a public high school in in a fluent suburb like Loudoun County in Virginia, is a fluent suburb, wealthiest suburb county in America outside of Washington D.C. And I remember during COVID, and I lived in the D.C. area. They were just talking about homes, teaching students staying home in the Baltimore public school system, and the arrogance of state politicians who do you think that every kid in the Baltimore public school system has a computer at home or even
No,
Wi-Fi at home? Of course
a
not.
warm house, right?
Yeah, like,
You
they're worried.
meal.
A lot of them are worried about getting shot in the morning when they walk to school. So that's
Exactly.
there's a lack of understanding, which goes to my point about this all being local.
Yeah.
Is that even at the state level, you can't possibly understand if you live in, Annapolis, what it's like to be an inner city kid in the Baltimore public school system.
Yeah. It's got to be done locally. And I just want to clarify. Um, I was just pointing out that it was up until, only a couple generations ago that um it morals, where religious laws, all that had influence in school districts. It wasn't until some cases, like some Supreme Court cases, that basically ruled that the state, you can't. There's also a separation of state, and when I say state, I mean each individual state and religion. Initially, it was just the separation of the federal government and religion, but states all had an official religion, and to hold office in our for the first some like maybe 50 years, some more, some states up to 100 had an official religion and whatnot. And I'm not calling back for the day of like God having in the school,
Oh, I know.
but I what?
Oh, I know you aren't.
But
I know you're not calling for like the Ten Commandments and
I
stuff to be
do,
hung up in classrooms.
yeah, but I do think schools and our education system does have a role to play in making public spirited citizens, right? That are invested in their invested in the country that they are. they're voting, they're electing officials, right? I, I, we, we have at the local level, this is best done, right? But and the school boards, obviously, the federal government, once they got involved, and they distribute funding to the states, states distribute it, and I believe that some of the state Department of Educations are some of the worst, some of the worst culprits of really kind of allowing our schools to, and districts to just decline and decline and standards to decline. Um, but I do believe our public education systems does have some role in producing like public spirited citizens, right?
Well, I think the slippery slope with that is if you give them a role, then that role is going to change over time. And whether it will please some people, it will upset some people. And again, you know, these local school boards and how they operate, oftentimes they reflect the sentiment, the majority sentiment of the community that they serve. And also you can vote these people out.
Yes,
Um, while I don't like a lot of the themes that I think were uncovered during COVID, as far as
critical race.
classrooms and teachers and some of the radical leftist ideas that they had and whatnot. And I think that was a wake up call and an eye opener for a lot of parents. Um,
And they're still there. All those theories.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not saying they're not. Also saying that parents are, it depends on where you live as to, how prominent they are. I would imagine that there are some, in the South, some public school systems. I know in the Midwest, it's not as much of a problem as it is in other places. And again, when we get away from the basics, at least what I believe are the basics, to walk out the door when you're 18, and you start talking about whether it's right leaning or left leaning cultural views, that's to me that's the ultimate slippery slope in public schools. And if and to me that's where I go back to student vouchers, um, where if you want your kid to be educated a certain way, I'd rather fund the student than fund the school, because right now we are funding, whether we like it or not, we're funding a lot of these radical things that occur in public schools across the country.
Totally, totally. We totally are. And one of the issues is the curriculums that are being bought. So those are the programs the schools or districts are using to teach the student, are written by these teachers' colleges, or these teacher preparation programs, or the pretty left-leaning uh, uh or like social science theory, this like academia, that collegiate academia that is historically has been, and especially in education, left leaning. And even so, these ideas are getting written and baked into just the way we teach. These teachers, like the teachers are trained at these teachers preparation colleges, that these are Columbia, all these programs.
Yeah, it's
And those programs are run by there is some, these professors and educational thinkers that have adopted a shockingly ideological view of society and learning.
I mean,
And
is it really that shocking? I mean, I went to a liberal college. University of Iowa was extremely liberal in the early 90s, and all of my professors, they
I
were
think it would
crazy
be
leftists.
shocking to the parents of the students, right? Like, if as a parent, it wasn't until I was in the school looking through these curriculums, diving into them. And again, I worked at the school, so I had access to it. I could talk to these curriculum companies, that I realized how ideologically driven some of this was. So the districts are presented with curriculum options. These big curriculum companies, so like McGraw-Hill, looked and said, "Man, we're making a ton of money in collegiate textbooks. Oh, there's a lot of money in K through 12, right?
Sure.
Get into that." And these big districts, it these big public school districts with, that are well funded kind of drive a lot of any change, or they drive the trends. They're pushing these ideas. They tend to be more, there's cities, right? So they tend to be maybe more left leaning to begin with. Again, teachers unions have such a strong hold on, in these school districts. And so these curriculums get purchased. Um, they're also written by the professors of these
But
teachers preparation programs. It's just this circle, right? It's very few people, and the ideas just are coming out. So then these rural districts that don't have, as much money or time, they don't have the curriculum specialists, they follow suit of what the urban districts have done and purchase the same. the
isn't
same
that slowly changing?
there is. So like that's one of the things, we call it the Mississippi Miracle. And it's part of a broader trend called the Southern Surge, where now they are finally starting to look at the curriculums, the methodologies for instructing, and they're getting more critical of what they're purchasing. In some cases, some states are actually writing curriculums by themselves or supplemental curriculums. So, Florida, which has also been an educational leader, the state doesn't want to tell these local school districts what they have to do, but the state said, okay, let's fund at the University of Florida, this literacy institute. Why are we have serious literacy issues? So they funded it. They dove in, did some research. This is the code keyword phonics, right? The hectophonics instructions, which is really just like the code to the English language. It's teaching a student CH is ch, right? Not instead of just saying ABC, we just sing the ABCs. A doesn't make a sound all the time, right? So phonics is which had been determined to be boring and rote and made kids uninterested. So they wanted to shift to more creative ways. So these curriculums were written, and they just kind of got rid of phonics. And again, there's a certain percentage of the population that will just read if they're exposed to books long enough. But there's a significant portion, and it often is boys, that will not. They need to be taught this explicit code. So because of the way their brains work. So Florida
Why wasn't this a problem in the 50s
because a lot of the issues with
or 60s, I guess. I mean go
it
back.
would so it started to be introduced in kind of the 60s. It came out of this really, there's been two progressive movements, some back into the early 1900s, like 1910, 1920s, 1930s. And then there was an additional uh but they didn't push it all the way. They
So
just around then we kind of adopted the Prussian model of the public education system under Wilson, which is like produce citizens who are going to go to work in the factories, right? That idea. Then in the like Cultural Revolution again, the universities in the 60s was a lot where we saw this rise in right Marxism, socialism. Um, Most of these theories kind of come out of there, and they've taken a while to trickle in. But and I could talk about this all day, and some of it gets crazy boring. And No Child Left Behind, just to clarify, in 1983, a report was written by the Department of Education that said we are failing to teach reading effectively. We need to get back to the methods of instruction, the skills. Again, they called for bringing phonics instruction back. We ignored it. We're
but see,
ignoring it, although it is starting to change.
I I disagree. I think we fail to teach reading properly to poor kids.
Well, rich kids can afford tutors
They don't
or
even need. Well,
additional
guess what
help.
though? If you're, I say rich, like it's not. If you got a smartphone in your hand since you're 8 years old, you're going to know how to read. That's what I'm saying. It's poor
If I
kids.
wouldn't, if
Go ahead.
if I wouldn't have intervened with my son, um, and he was at a private Catholic school, if I wouldn't have intervened when I saw, he was struggling, he went into, I don't want to blow up my child's spot here, but he went into third grade behind grade level. Um, and they at his old school, they were using curriculums that were this, they it's like this idea of balance, whole language, balanced literacy.
Right.
Um, and
But
I was supplementing at home doing that. If I would have relied on this private school alone in the Pittsburgh School District in upstate New York is a well-funded, high-quality district. And it's not always, it's not just,
but aren't
I'm going
we?
to push back a little on it not being poor kids. What I think happens is these districts are, in many cases, they're still not teaching it effectively, but the district can afford more intervention services, or the parents individually pay for tutoring.
I'll tell you what. You find me one of the top 50 uh, counties in America. I'd like to see what their high school public graduation metrics are, because as far as the wealthiest counties in America, I really believe that so much of the education problem in America is income, and that if you are in a family where there are two parents and stable income,
Oh, oh,
that your
okay. Sorry.
chances of
Yeah,
not being able to read or write are so slim compared
yes.
to your home environment. There's so many
I
metrics.
thought
As
you
I
were
said,
talking about school funding individually.
no, well, I
It is, it matters. But yes, kids that come from two-parent homes, right?
there's so much that goes into it. It's not just I my problem is there's so much damn focus on what the schools do. And
Yeah.
you know, the least important thing in my high school experience was being in class. I learned way more playing sports about leadership and followership and disappointment and uh, understanding that working hard without knowing, um, without a promised result is
Yeah.
important.
One,
And I couldn't tell you a damn thing about algebra in high school, and I never had to use it in my life. And with smartphones and I think it's harder and harder to convince younger kids today, kids in school, particularly in high school, that what they're being taught, which is based on shit from 50 years ago, that it's going to be relevant to them.
yeah, I can see your point and whatnot. I will say to me, and again, this comes kind of out of the ideological wings of academia and these teachers prep programs, they're influencing the curriculum. But the idea that the goal of education should be, in my opinion, it should be maximize every individual student's potential, right? To take whatever, this way here, because every brain's different. The results are never going to be the same, right? Every human's different, experiences are different. But when the goalpost has shifted quietly, uh, while most parents had no idea, and even I think many of the teachers or the people working in education realized when the goal became minimizing the gap between the lowest achievers and the highest achievers, as opposed to maximizing every student's potential, we really lost our way.
And that's because of the federal government getting involved.
Um,
I mean, when they created the Department of Education, it all kind of started going downhill from there. To maximize every student's potential, that is not the job of public education or any school, because maximizing a kid's potential is not just going to school.
well,
It's
okay,
right, but
um, but like when the focus became instead on narrowing the gap between right, like by eliminating gifted and talented programs, right? We narrowed the gap at districts, right?
what does that mean? Eliminate gifted and talented programs.
So many, especially in these urban districts, eliminated the gifted and talented programs and their schools because it was racist or unfair.
Yeah, but you know who didn't do that? Private schools. Like that's my
Exactly.
point.
Well, totally, totally. These private schools are just often meeting the massive need that these public education systems are just leaving on the table. But what I'm seeing is like instead, okay, we can't maximize every student's potential because there's aspects out of that. More making sure every student in the school is taught the basics and is able to best use them to their ability, right? But again, the focus has been on what's equitable, right? Like these policies that have come out of this search for all-encompassing search for equity have been like eliminating standardized tests and then universities having to teach elementary and middle school math remedial classes, right? Um, the goal it, it and I would say that to me, again, I'm no expert from what I've kind of learned. It seemed like this ideology kind of became pervasive out of the 60s and um, the rise of some of this more socialist Marxist ideas, if that makes sense, right?
Well, I mean, I think that um, we're trying to run an airline with propeller-driven airplanes when jet engines
Yeah.
clearly exist. You know, we're
But
trying
I
to
would think,
improve education under the framework of an archaic, antiquated system.
yes.
That's my problem.
Yeah, oh, I
Is that
agree.
who the hell says you have to go to school for X amount of hours a day? Who says you get the whole summer off? Like there are other models around the world where students are taught differently. Um,
Yeah. Well,
and
we have the
and
summers off because the farmers needed their students. They
yes,
needed,
that's not a thing anymore. I mean, it is in some parts of the country, but I mean,
and this idea of like, yeah, the timing, right? The hours. This again comes out of this Prussian model. We largely adopted a lot, John Dewey, out of the Prussian model of you're trying to produce able factory work, right? Able-bodied factory workers and good.
but we need that. I mean, again, our education system is not flexible and adaptable to what society and the economy needs. Our current as it currently is constructed, our education system can't keep up.
No, but we weren't always trying to just produce factory workers. We weren't always trying to do that, right?
Right.
It
But
it was when we kind of got to this. Plus, I don't think anyone can have an honest conversation around education without raising the issue of are schools childcare or are they an education system, right? Right. And
I think that depends on your socioeconomic status.
exactly. Exactly. Which is again why school choice should exist and these private school models. But I guess one of the things I see is I would guess a lot of people in America don't even realize we have challenges in our education system or that we're graduating like here in the city of Rochester. If you go back, um, so proficient this federal test, right? It breaks down students. It's they do it every 3 years, so fourth grade, eighth grade, and then in high school. And so we had eighth graders um, in our public school systems uh, 4 years ago, like COVID, that only like 20% of that eighth grade, in this school in this district that took these reading tests were proficient in reading. Fast forward 4 years later, you know what their graduation rate was? Like 75. So
Yeah, and I
you're
don't doubt it.
graduating kids that are not proficient in reading, and math always follows it because math becomes word problems, right? Like,
Well, but And again, I think you kind of proved my point for me. Everybody talks about when they talk about education, they have local stories,
Yeah,
which to me says it needs to be locally managed and that
yeah.
the federal government needs to get out of it. I
But
also art, well, but also I am not well versed in what the actual standards are. I know they vary from state to state and, local district to local district. Um, but I'd like to see exactly um, how they are different across the country, um, and what actually is reading at a third grade level or fourth grade level, and not just, I mean, I can Google it obviously, but more from a pragmatic perspective than a this is what the book says, this is what um, the government says, or the PTA said, or not the PTA, but the school board says about what is an actual measurable metric
yeah.
for this.
And they usually test like reading comprehension, right? So there, it's not just reading, like being able to read out loud the words on a page during these
Yeah.
sentences, but your ability to then regurgitate that, understand what it is, regurgitate back, um, analyze what was said, right? Arguments, understand the author's point. So if phonics is only the beginning of the issues. Like if phonics is just the code to be able to literally recognize the words and read them and the sounds on the piece of paper, then you need to learn how to spell, which is encoding, which is the opposite. Hear the sounds, translate them back to the graphemes, which is the letters. Uh, and then that's the beginning, though. Then you need to be able to comprehend what you read
So I,
and
I
what you read, all that. So
I just think that a lot of our standards, and I say that with air quotes, a lot of our standards are antiquated. And I say that because in 1970 we did not have smartphones, we did not have personal computers, we did not have AI. Um, and so, do you really need to spend that amount of time in a classroom every year if you're a kid? Are there better ways to spend
no,
your time?
absolutely learning actual
I'm
skills.
not saying there is or there isn't. I'm saying the
No,
question should be asked. Like, we are an obese society.
yes.
And I might say walking out of the classroom, walking out of the high school with your diploma when you're 18, maybe you should have to pass a physical fitness test too. You talk about
You
national
used to
security
have to,
concerns.
right?
Well, I don't know if you had to like get your
Yeah.
diploma.
There,
I graduated with some fat
oh,
kids, but
okay.
yeah, but
Maybe not to get your diploma, but physical education was a component
right.
of the
I
day.
I mean, making it a part of uh your lifestyle, making
Yes.
healthy choices. Again, I think it's really hard in today's day and age with technology to try to convince a 15-year-old sitting in a classroom that trigonometry is going to be important to their life when they know that when they graduate, they're going to go do X, Y, or Z that won't involve trigonometry. They could sell that to us when we were well, at least when I was in high school. I'm not going to date you, but like myself, I'm 52 years old. I didn't have a bullshit filter in 1986 taking math classes that it would not be meaningful to me. Um,
But again, this idea of like equitable and everyone needs to go to college. We
I
used
think
to have
that's
trade
dead.
schools. We used to have trade schools, right?
But I think the whole college thing, that myth is dying.
Yes, and it needs to change. And but I guess my overall point, I think we largely agree on this.
More than
I-
I thought we would, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I see is like I look at some of the struggle is there's so many people that don't even understand how the dysfunction that is currently existing in many of our school systems. Like for example, they're they're if a student is diagnosed with something and their behavior is a response to that learning disability or challenge, you're not allowed to discipline students for that behavior because the idea is it's triggered by an underlying challenge. So what ends up happening in some cases is a student will get upset, but the response will be to remove the whole class and let the
Yeah, and
student.
that's
And
like, do you
it's
think that
not,
goes on everywhere?
it doesn't happen every day everywhere, but there is also in general, there is a lack of um and this is what I mean by like public spirited, like bring back discipline, expectations, consequences, right? You can't talk back to teachers, you can't disrespect them, you can't hit other students, right? And we're so afraid again because this idea, it's well, it's not fair, it's not equitable because maybe the student comes from a home where they're exposed to this, right? Um, we've just slowly, uh, we it's just slowly. Some of these public schools are chaos factories.
They are, and I don't think that is a secret to most people who are paying attention. Maybe the details, like you described, like, okay, a kid has a fit, and the whole class leaves so they can deal with it. I'm not into those kind of details, but the idea that the public schools, I think, those in, a fairly well-informed citizen would know that, okay, Baltimore public school system has a problem. Chicago has problems, like, and um
But
all
oh, sorry, no,
no,
finish.
but all that being said, um, well, you go ahead. I'm
Well,
curious what your thoughts are.
I want to be careful because what I said, this idea of inclusion and mainstreaming, putting students with intellectual or developmental disabilities, right, in a mainstream class with additional supports, uh, it, that idea, is good. But the reality is there's different types of disabilities or challenges students have. A behavioral challenge, right? Students with behavioral issues are often highly disruptive, right? Teach teachers and administrative hands are tied with what they can do. As opposed to, a child who um maybe uh like with certain disabilities that the social balance, is good for them interacting with other students. And then maybe they get a little additional support, right? Like they like reading disabilities, like stuff like that, where again, don't like fully take them out and put them in a completely different environment, but they're not one in the same. Behavioral challenges are very different, and our system doesn't always distinguish between the two. And this idea of like it has to be equitable and fair. Every student has to have the same thing. Well, at a certain point, the need, we need to make sure we never prioritize the needs of a few individuals over the larger needs of the class, right? And
Yeah, and I also think that we're not Americans aren't having as many kids, and that is probably to a benefit to the teachers unions and the education associate and the education system, because people aren't paying attention.
yeah,
Nobody pays more attention to how schools operate than parents. And that's why COVID was such a problem
yeah,
for the teachers unions and public education, um, and their lack of transparency as a general rule for public schools across the board, particularly elementary schools. What I really hope happens is that the Department of Education goes away, which I realize is a very long shot, but I would like what we're dealing with in a enterprise approach to education to be considered when we talk about educating our kids. AI, smartphones, social media, the ability to invest at your fingertips, managing money, making smart financial decisions, um, along with the basics, but also with the understanding that um, understanding how to do math in 2026 is not the same as it was in 1926.
no,
It just isn't. We let cursive writing go by the wayside, and I wish I could still, I used to write in cursive. I don't anymore. And I would have a hard time doing it. Like was, you know, I could write in cursive when I was in fifth grade, no problem. But
Yeah.
it went away, and it was not a basic life skill I needed. And, and
Yeah.
why can't we take a similar approach to other things? You know, when when you had shop in high school, well, you chose a path. Maybe as a freshman or a sophomore, I'm not going to take certain technical classes or scientific classes because I'm going to go more the trade route. Um, I don't think that's a problem. And I think that mindset needs to be applied to everything in K through 12 education.
Yeah.
Um, because I think so much of what the education elites, if you will, the people you describe who write these curriculums and do the things they do, I think
And get paid every step of the way, right?
absolutely they
Who
get
have a
paid.
financial stake in it. Yep.
And that's why they're slow to change, is that it, that class is going to lose money if you overhaul and transform the education system. Why is it that it's still such a negative? There's such a negative cloud over homeschooling when
I,
people that are homeschooled do extremely well.
I think that that mentality is changing. And to your point, Richard, so I guess kind of like overall where I fall, I still am not convinced everyone is fully aware of just how serious some of the issues in our publication system is and the consequences of them. And the students we're graduating versus the skills they actually have. Um, and then obviously we get into the ideas, like the underlying causes, right? We're still not addressing or trying to root out some of these more ideological beliefs that are impacting, right? Um, and, uh, and, uh, and, we're not bringing someone kind of new into the equation. And school choice is clearly a threat. Vouchers are clearly a threat to the existing system as it is, because uh, it's interesting. You should see the campaigns um, that these teachers' unions, run to stop school choice, right? Because any threat to cutting funding, even if it's only to right size the current student enrollment, which is pretty much declining across the country, right, it's to reset the staff student ratio. Most of them won't even allow that, right? That's how you get a school with 28 kids when there's only 20 or 28 staff and there's only 27 students, right? Those unions stop that. Um, and the curriculum stop that. There's also, to get into the education field, you pretty much have one track. To become a principal, certified principal, you have to have a teacher. You have to be a teacher, certified teacher. It is really hard to enter the education world from the outside. It's a pretty fairly protected track. Um, that being said, um, these administrative courses, the principal, we'll call them principal schools or programs. There's not a lot about managing people, right? They not a lot about financially running a school district, right? You become a principal, and suddenly most of your job is managing people, right? And they're not necessarily being trained for that. So there's a lot of practices and things that go on in schools that aren't um, let's just say anybody that's run a business, a successful business, would be shocked by some of just the managerial practices, and what's tolerated. Uh, and then you've got teachers unions, 10 years, that whole idea. So the model, isn't changing. Again, I don't even think some people realize just how, how kind of ideological it's become. And then you have these alternatives that are popping up. It's not just homeschooling. There's new models popping up that are, I mean, incredible. There's this model, it's called the Acton school. You got Montessori models um, that, have different philosophies. But this Acton model, it's a philosophy, and parents can start the school, or it's a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, um, creating these schools, they're using the smart goal setting system, which is what a lot of businesses use to
Right, but those schools still are on a traditional
no,
schedule.
no. Well, maybe like were you talking about the hours?
Yeah, I mean, again, yeah, like how many hours a day are these kids spending at
Well,
school in a
no.
classroom?
But their classroom, like there's one Acton school, it's run out of Zilker Park in Austin. They're outside every day for lunch. They go outside, they play. They're not doing
So,
um they're doing hands-on projects. Their their time like in a formal classroom is very limited, right? And
I'm just saying that you can learn everything you need to learn
yeah,
when you graduate high school. You can learn that by the time you're 15. That's what I'm saying.
yeah,
Like
yeah, I think
we need to completely blow up the education model because it's again, it's like
I agree.
it's a very grandiose pie in the sky idea, but the notion that these kids need to spend so much time in their lives, they don't have any choice. Like I think it's wonderful that you can graduate high school early. I mean, that's still not an option for a lot of people in certain, in private schools and whatnot. But we still talk, and a lot of this conversation has been this way. We still talk in a constrained model where, well, there's just some things, it's not even discussed about, we just accept so many certain constraints that we've just operated under the system for so long and it's so inefficient
It's
and
some of
and
that actually we can't change until because the states mandate students,
but
you
the
know,
states but again,
do
like
yeah,
we
they
can't
can
change.
change. They can totally change.
Yes,
And but we are under fear, like the system is under fierce resistance from from again, these entrenched ideas and people and ideologies. Um, and I think they're I guess to me, I say so much like, okay, the hours, right, that you get dropped off at school, like you can still be a really unique model and follow the same somewhat schedule, right? And again, though, but these kids aren't sitting in classrooms all day, right? They're out doing projects, like hands-on skills. They're learning and like they're
nobody's outside in December in Minnesota doing hands-on
well,
projects.
okay, I'm sorry, I'm using the example of the one in
Yeah,
Texas, right?
I get it.
But these collectives, even if they follow the whatever 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. schedule, there's still these collectives that are popping up, the homeschooling, it is popping up. But unfortunately, it's somewhat of an access issue, right? Can you either you get the vouchers or there's a parent available. One of the issues like with a lot of these homeschool collectivists, they require you as a parent to give a certain number of your time. But I completely agree, right? Our our needs are different, like the skills are different, but we are so entrenched in it.
I see, and that's where I think if you just said, like, this is what you need to do when you get your diploma, you have to do X amount of things, passing tests, whatever the case may be. And I don't care how you get there. I think that to me is a far more because that's kind of how it is in the real world. It
But
doesn't, United
yeah,
Airlines doesn't discriminate about how you got your pilot's license as long as you
no.
have it. There's a million different ways to get your hours
And
and get trained.
I see this
That's what I'm
naturally happening once we fully break that high school to connection, right? Like once we kind of disconnect that pipeline that you automatically have to go to college, right? Because you're not
Oh,
going
I think that's broken. I think that ship sailed years ago. I think
to
COVID sealed that.
hopefully.
I think first off, student loans really that's what when that ship started taking on water, it was student loans. And
Yeah.
people are like, this is crazy. And yes, they may have been sold a shitty a shitty bag of goods,
But
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 they
Richard,
realize go ahead.
that falls under this idea of equity, right? Every student deserves to go to college. Every student deserves a chance. So the government has to
I
get in.
see. I don't think that. I don't think that that was a thing. I think it was a lot of peer pressure. You're an idiot. You're dumb
Oh
if you
no.
don't go to
Well, I'm
college.
saying no, but first the government had to get involved and say, yes, we will we'll take the risk of these loans, right? Before that. the period, but that if you don't go to college, it's somehow racist or, it's not fair that every student deserves to go. I believe some of that stemmed from this. That narrative came out of the government basically taking the risk out of student loans, absorbing the risk. So suddenly that narrative worked,
When did
right?
the government get involved in student loans?
They first started getting, I believe, in the 60s, um, or like expanded access to education. And it kind of, all over multiple decades, it rapidly increased. But um, yeah, I believe it was some of it was um, under LBJ, the Great Society, this idea that like more more minority access or like socioeconomic access to college, and then and right, I think sometimes when the government gets involved, creates these uh, backwards incentives or perverse incentives, and of course, this like academia
Yeah,
is
but
going to
but when
push
they got involved,
college.
but the federal government got involved initially because of national security stuff in the 50s and 60s. It was NASA. I forget the name of the programs. They were not involved. Like if you want to go study, you know, uh, philosophy at a little private college with 3,000 students, the federal government didn't get
Oh,
involved in that in the 50s or 60s. Like they,
no, no. I'm saying it when it became an equity issue, a race, right? Then, and we started to, and when the loans, um, when there was like a disconnect, like this idea that, like, again, everyone deserves the chance to go. The government is going to absorb the risk, right? Because prior to the government basically saying, it doesn't matter if the student loans defaulted, like we're going to guarantee them. Colleges and universities would have not been like trying to sell their services to high, like
oh
high.
yeah,
I mean, like it would have been kind of like crazy. So this, like you would have never, because universities would want to, they wouldn't want to be left on the hook, not getting paid. So I personally believe that some of this incentive, this idea of college, right, this track from high school to college comes out as a result of the government basically taking a lot of the risk uh, out of default and the universities pushing down this ideology of everyone deserves a chance. And when we eliminated trade schools, I think it's all kind of connected to the same thing.
well, I mean, I don't I don't disagree with your premise that there's a connection. I do believe that uh, a stigma that I think was much more wide 45, 50 years ago about going to college versus not going to college. It's now more of a stigma if you're of means and you decide not to go to college. Um, I've been around a lot of graduations the last few years, high school graduations, and all these graduation parties are themed on where they're going to school,
Yep.
people who are leaving states to go to public state institutions in another state, people leaving Colorado to go to Florida State. It's like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
You know,
And that's where I'm
but they,
saying, if until that pipeline is fractured, the many people will look at the purpose of K through 12 education as a stepping stone to get to college.
I'm saying that you don't need to be smart to get into Florida State. It's a
I
prestige.
agree.
They want to go party. They want to go like college is not the same as it was 40 years ago. The idea of college is different for a lot of these kids, but the education system, colleges took advantage of the federal government. And
Totally. But why
and
wouldn't they?
well, if you believe that they
They
were
could
supposed
make
to be
more money.
ethical institutions of
Yeah.
higher learning, they shouldn't have done that. but they also grew their administrations to crazy sizes because they needed to spend the money somehow to
100%.
justify it. Yeah, you
They
can't.
raised their tuition. In many of those places, and people will tell you, we did it to expand access to higher education, right? That they'll swear to this day that that was what it was for.
But I also think the market will determine uh, higher education successes and failures moving
Yeah.
forward.
Oh,
Because I just,
100%. The
well,
fact that Meta, well, I think the fact that Meta, these tech companies are saying, no, we'll recruit you right out of high school. We don't want you to have any college, right? To me, that's a strong indicator of that change is happening.
see, I'm not going to use the tech industry to gauge anything yet. My, the enrollments haven't gone down at all in these extremely large public institutions. They're all still doing extremely well. And until that number changes,
Yeah.
um,
It's some of the smaller private ones are now going belly up.
and good. I mean,
Yeah, they
that
should. Yeah.
I again, not all. When you look at very large public universities, they contribute to the greater good. I use close to home the Big Ten conference, the Big Ten, all the universities. The Big Ten has an alliance of all their schools that they're medical schools to fight cancer,
Yep.
and they share information and they conduct research projects together and they do all these wonderful things and they're invaluable. They're very valuable assets to their states and their communities. If you're sick in the state of Iowa, the best place to go is the University of Iowa Healthcare, UIHC. Everybody knows it. It's an amazing hospital system, and so I don't want to. I'm not saying that I want to poo-poo the downfall of universities, but they play a role in the problems we have with public education in America in many, many ways. And so does the federal government. And we could talk about this forever,
Yeah. I
but
will just one thing. These non-for-profit university-based healthcare systems have been massive winners out of Obamacare, right? They they don't pay any taxes or anything. They're absorbing up a lot of the smaller practices around them. I'll just use University of Rochester, for example. They do a lot of government research, whatnot. It's like a $6 billion a year in revenue. Less than 5% comes from tuition now of the University of Rochester.
and how big is that school?
Students or
Yeah,
um, you know what, off the top of my head, I'm not certain. I could pull it up quick, but less than 5% of their revenues come from tuition. It's primarily through they're one of the largest healthcare providers, in the area. That's a topic for another day, but
it
they,
is about 12,000 students, according
yeah,
to.
yeah. And if you're a full-time student, living in there, I think it's over $90,000 a year now.
That's crazy to me.
Yep.
But again,
Being like just below, they're not an Ivy, but they're a good school. Uh,
I've never heard of them. Like,
University of Rochester.
nope. And that's
They,
not to say that I'm the end all
yeah,
be all. I'm not, but I could certainly name every major Division One school
yeah.
in football, and I mean I've been around it enough. Like lived in the Northeast, I had no idea that the University of Rochester was that prestigious.
Well, U of R MC, uh, U of R medical, like the whole medical system, it's the largest provider of, healthcare around here. It's expanded into, all around the area. Um, but there are some negative impacts of it. For example, every building they own does not pay property tax. So they've been buying up practices and hospitals and locations in the more rural areas outside of the city. And in some of those cases, in those rural towns, those if it was a private hospital or private medical practice, medical center, they were a significant portion of the property tax revenue or budget. But again, that's a whole nother idea. I think there though, again, universities and colleges, what is their purpose, right? What comes back to the purposes. I completely agree. We have to go back to first principles here in education. What is it we're trying to achieve, right? What do we want?
Yeah.
And are we doing it well now?
No, we're not.
Yeah.
And well, I disagree. I think it depends on where you live and your situation. I think that if you are in a suburb like Edina, Minnesota, and you go to a public high school, you're probably doing just fine.
Yeah.
And again, it's to me, it's very much a socioeconomic argument, but also I think there's a group of people, to include the teachers unions, who operate and negotiate and strategize in a constrained environment. The idea of a constrained environment,
Yes.
that that the models for how we educate our children in public schools in America uh, really can't be changed.
Yep.
Um, and that we can't just blow up the system and reinvent how the heck we do this. If I said to Elon Musk, how is the best way? And I just use him because he's obviously a smart
Yeah.
guy. If you think he's not a smart guy, then I don't know what to tell you. But I think he's a smart guy. I know you do too, Kelly.
Yeah.
If
Totally.
if I ask Elon Musk, what's the best way to educate a kid from preschool to 12th to high school graduation? I don't think his idea would mirror or look much like the way we currently do it. Even in like private schools in America,
Yeah.
it would not look remotely like the.
My own impression, like I think it was it Twain, Mark Twain or Einstein said something along the lines of, "I never let my education get in the way of me learning," right?
Right.
Like that, that's my personal philosophy with my son, right? Just but it is totally a have versus have nots, socioeconomic. Um, but I think there's some cultural division in there too, personally. And these unions, they do have a chokehold. To come full circle to the Chicago public schools, as we kind of wrap up here, like I said, is is the Chicago public schools a jobs program for the Chicago Teachers Union, or is it to serve the the students in the students in Chicago? Because in addition to if you just listen to that union leadership and the narrative there, and if this goes too for the federal teachers union, Randy Weingarten, their scope keeps expanding. Suddenly Randy Weingarten is on like at a pre-Palestine convention somewhere, in Europe. Like what? You know,
Yeah. Uh,
Chicago Teachers Union are saying that the schools need to be where the students get medical services, right? Like all of this, we need after school care, like all this. We just, again, let's go first principles, right? What is it we need? How are we doing it? Is it working? And and unfortunately, I don't like this prediction, but I think we're still going to kind of, the haves are probably going to continue to have for a while, and the have-nots, right? The
oh, certainly.
and at what point is it going to get bad enough and snap or break? Or does it take like a school district, literally becoming insolvent, right? I
I
don't know.
don't. I don't think it matters. I really don't. I don't think it could ever get to a point where it would uh, impact the teachers unions and how they conduct themselves, because they just don't care about the kids. They
Yeah.
care about.
Yeah. It's Chicago Public Schools is a jobs program.
Of course it is.
Yeah.
There's 28 employees to 27 students in the one you
Yep.
brought up at the start of this pod.
Yeah.
And Like for example, Mississippi has teachers unions, but state law prohibits public employees from engaging in collective bargaining or striking. So yeah, you can be in a union. That doesn't mean, but if you can't collectively bargain or strike, you have no leverage or
Yeah.
power.
Yeah.
And
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 so it's
so
easier for Mississippi, the state education department, to go into Mississippi and say, you know what we're doing isn't working. Let's try some new things.
yeah, and so I think that again, this has been a very wide-ranging conversation, but if you can agree on what you're trying to accomplish with putting someone out the door with a diploma, and that doesn't mean that that will just be all that they walk out the door with, um, because you know what? Not every baseball player can hit 300. Some are going to hit 245, 250. That
Yes.
doesn't mean they
Yeah.
can't play baseball for a long time. Some kids are smarter than others,
Yeah.
and the education system can't do anything about that. That doesn't mean that a kid that graduates with B's and is not going to college, that's not even a right. I feel bad even saying that because you
Yeah.
know what? Your grades in high school are not indicative of your success in life. And you could be extremely smart and decide not to go to college and go be an electrician or a plumber, which are great.
Look at
I,
some of
I don't
them.
like the idea that there's disparities between college and the trades. I think they're
Yeah.
all, but but we really just need to get to a point where, and it's going to be done at the local state level in the South primarily,
Yeah.
is these school districts that I believe will follow what Mississippi has done.
And there are
And
other,
they'll just they'll outrun their
yeah,
success will be a blueprint and will be enough leverage against the teachers unions, um, that again, I think the goal would be to isolate the Illinois and the Californias, the Oregons, the Washingtons, the New
New
Yorks
York's,
of the world.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it Mississippi is part of this larger southern surge, and I totally agree with you. The prevalence of unions, right? And you know, and change coming in, right? And just this willingness to look and say, hold on, if this curriculum's not working, right? There's probably a lot less connection between the Columbia Teachers College and a district in Mississippi as there is the Columbia's teacher prep college that also the woman who ran it for years wrote and sold and consulted on her curriculum to these school districts, right? She's making money the whole way. Um, as and New York City school districts, for example, right? So that where there's some distance between the more ideologically driven aspects of education, they're more, again, they're more, we've seen it, they're more open to change, willing to change, try something new, not be stuck in the way. And Florida, Tennessee, some Georgia, some of these other schools are doing things, they're getting in line with it. Just this shouldn't be controversial, Richard. But
Well, yeah, I suppose it shouldn't be. I would also say that I'm not even so sure that at the state level it's the right argument because,
yeah,
you said Tennessee. I got to believe there's a big difference between the Nashville public school
100,
system
yeah,
and, smaller communities in the state of Tennessee. I know my home state in Iowa, the Des Moines
yeah.
public
Des
school
Moines,
system.
Ian
Yeah,
Roberts.
yeah,
Oh,
they've been in the news a few times.
yeah,
It's a big difference from, certainly where I grew up in Iowa, which was actually not a very small town, pretty big town, Council Bluffs, but um, uh, it's just so hard to compare, and it's all local, and
yeah,
it's so personal for so many people because it's their kids,
yeah,
and I understand that, and that's where. Um, I just think it's so awful that Democrats, and I say Democrats, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, but the Democrats are so damn scared of these unions.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
will never for the life of me understand why.
yes.
I know that the unions raise money but like America will go on if the National Education Association doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Our education system can't get much worse. Like why are they so scared? And that's a topic for another episode, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it amazes me how they have such a, I get like Wall Street having a hold on political parties or
Yeah.
big tech because they have a ton of money.
Yeah.
Teachers unions don't have any money compared to those entities that I just mentioned.
You'd be a little surprised by some of them. Their pension funds have money. That,
They
that
do.
that is a key part of it.
That's a
But
good point. That's a good point. They definitely have
yeah,
that.
and like Randy Weingarten, the federal, the pension funds, she's the head of the like federal teachers union, um, boycotting Target because Target basically said we will like we are going to um we're not going to stop ICE from entering some of our stores to shop or some came out of Mississippi or Minnesota or something. But anyways, so now Randy Weingarten has run this campaign, boycott Target, don't shop at Target. You're back to school. Again, it's become political, ideological. And at this, I was going to say at the same time, the Republicans have basically just been like hands off. They're not addressing it either. They more in favor of school choice, right? But they're just like, right? I mean, why doesn't some Republican candidate take this on? Even at the local level, say, hey, we can do better, right? They're not either.
Well, I think, and to some extent, if you're, well, I'll say this. The people that are, the people that really suffer in public education, a lot of them don't vote.
Yeah.
And if you are sending your kids to private schools or outstanding public schools in affluent areas of the country,
Mhm.
you're probably voting.
Yeah.
And you're probably have a louder voice in the public square
Yep.
than a single mother whose child has never known who their father was.
Yep.
Uh, there's a big difference
Mom's
between like,
working two jobs, right?
yeah, um,
Just doesn't have the
with
time, can't
with
afford the library of baby, right? Of books.
well, but I mean, but again, but we try to, I think Republicans stay out of it in large part because they're labeled as being insensitive. But
Yeah.
if the public school system is constantly catering to the lowest common denominator in the student population to bring them forward, that's sometimes you got to call the herd. And that's a terrible thing to say, but it happens no matter our best efforts.
Yeah.
There are kids who make willful choices that they don't care about school.
Yep. Yep.
And and to make kids that do care about school sacrifice on behalf of kids that don't care about school, well, that's
Yeah.
not right either. And so I lack the tact to say this more compassionately. And so I apologize to whoever I've offended in our audience, but if you're the parents of a kid who does care and tries and does well, do you really want their progress to be impeded
Nope.
by, a kid that I regardless of their circumstances, which I fully understand that matters in
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
in their education journey. But if they don't give a shit, if they're a sophomore in high school and they don't give a shit about going to class and they're dealing drugs or participating in illegal activities or being in a gang,
Yeah.
well, the sophomore in that class that does care, they shouldn't have to pay the price for that.
100%.
And I,
One,
I feel like far too often, particularly in urban areas in America, that's the case with public
yeah.
schools.
And a lot of the parents probably don't even know to the extent it's going on because these students have grown up, right? The students that are good and thrive, they've kind of grown up in this environment. So they may not, right? They may not know, or they may just, well, we've always kind of been disrupted, right? Like, and
Right.
that's sad. So,
No, you're 100% correct. You are a
yeah,
product of what you know.
yeah,
Um, and again, you know, I go back to the military. Sometimes when I was in the Air Force, we thought we had it. We were like in a crappy situation. And, one time forward deploy, we had some Army guys on our base and they were Patriot missile guys, air defense artillery guys. And they thought they were at the Four Seasons. They thought it was great.
Oh, yeah, right. You cushy Air Force guys.
Oh yeah, we were like, I was like, oh man, this deployment
Ugh,
kind of sucks, whatever.
yeah,
And they were
ugh.
like, our tent has air conditioning. Like
They're
they
like, we
loved it.
have the tent.
Every tent has a TV in it. Like this, like we are living large.
It's
Um,
all relative, right?
it's all relative. And again, it's impossible, in my opinion, and I don't use the word impossible lightly. It's impossible for, I believe, for people like you and I to understand what it's like to have young children in like the Baltimore public school system
Yeah.
and live in a terrible part of town where you're worried about, feeding your kids is probably the least of your concerns on certain days. You don't want them to get shot or a stray bullet to come into your home.
Yeah.
And there's and again, those are challenges and issues that I don't think public schools are responsible for trying to solve.
No. And I've volunteered in the past to help some families from, inner city Rochester. And yeah, the needs are so completely different. And parents, in many cases, speak little or no English in a
Right.
lot of these urban areas. And the kids, if the kids are worried, if they're coming to school hungry, cold, tired, right? It's a warm place, a meal,
Yeah,
anything is an improvement. And
certainly.
and again, to me, it seems ludicrous that we hold the same expectations or like state standards, right? In the district I'm in here in Pittsburgh, New York, versus the city of Rochester. It's what, like, I don't know, 10 miles as the crow flies or less. Um, the fact that we compare students out of these two environments and with very different levels of funding, support, and environmental conditions, and that it's like, well, we expect the same. It's just, but, but I mean, yeah, it's just, I think we could probably talk about this all day.
Well,
And
this won't be our last episode talking about this. I mean, we
no, because I think this is an important issue
is.
for our society, for our future, right? And it plays into the larger context of children in America, right? Our next generation, um, and our future.
It goes to the title of our podcast. I mean,
Yep.
superpower logic. You know, we can't be a meaningful, responsible, ethical superpower if we do not have an educated population. And I think, as we have seen in what's been going on in Iran and Ukraine and America's at times paralysis when it comes to adapting quickly, and oftentimes when we do adapt, it's because we're reacting to something.
Yeah.
Um, and I hate that we are reacting to the circumstances and challenges that society and the modern world is presenting to our education system. I wish we were looking
And
forward more and making
yeah,
changes before those changes were necessary based on what's
yeah.
going on in the world.
As our nation's report card in 1983, that report stated simply, if you were an enemy, you could have not come up with or scripted a better plan to undermine our country as to um, jeopardize the educational system and undermine it and um, but it really to dismantle a system that is the future of your society to lower the standards. um like, if you're an enemy, you literally could not come up with a better weapon, right?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly it certainly was a awful, you know, and accurate assessment of kind of where things have gone.
Mm.
Um, maybe one of the few things the education department's ever produced that was of value.
Yeah, right? So, all right. Well, I mean, anything else? Any last words here?
I'll say one quick final thing, because it's come up in the back of my mind a few times during this discussion we've had, and it's been a really good one. I've enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Um, and that is that as education has declined, I also think that, and I did touch on this about students' home life and the American family and having two parents, but also, and I'm admittedly not the most religious person in the world, but a lot of what you were discussing earlier, Kelly, about American values and appreciating that we are in America, and that probably the greatest gift you're going to enjoy as an American is that you were born here.
Yep.
Um, a lot of that uh, understanding, a lot of that uh, that was done by churches and and the sense of community that existed from a far more religious society, even 30, 40 years ago. Certainly very much more religious in the 40s, 50s, 60s, or the 40s and 50s.
Mhm.
And so I think having a conversation about education, it would be remiss if we did not just at least acknowledge that the decline in religion has been a part of this
The
problem.
breakdown of the family unit.
Yes,
Right? There's a lot of things about our society, that are changing. And 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 just to kind of like build on that point, I think that um, we knew for a long time, as much as this country was built on a separation of church and state at the federal level, at the state level, among states, uh, religion and those kind of like the common law that religion was based off of, right? It was less than 100 years ago where common law, the expectation was you had to take care of your children, and children had to take care of their parents and their grandparents, right? Like, and in churches, religious groups, they were such a big part of that, organizing the community, holding it together. And that has also, yes, it's dramatically changed. We become that kind of less less religious, but less I don't know, more like introverted at a like society, at like a local community level, right? The community now seems a little more fractured and disenfranchised, um and again, I think comes back to like these American first principles, right? Being an American, just how lucky you are, these rights that this system is based off, and your duty as an American, right, to participate in it, or if you're going to participate in it, to be informed. I don't know. That's a conversation I think should come back into the national dialogue.
agreed.
Yeah.
Very well said. Great way to end this pod. It's been fun, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot. So, um,
Hopefully, I didn't bore you too much and I wasn't all over the place because, like I said, once I got inside of it and had some experience both as a parent and as a staff member, God, I learned a lot. Some I wish I
yeah.
didn't.
Again, it's education, something that touches everybody. Some
Yeah.
more personally than others, but we all have. They may not be your kids, but we all have
Yeah.
young people in our lives, and we all went. It's one thing we all have in common. We all went through it.
Yep.
And I think it's a unique issue that every American has some credibility to weigh in on, because, as I said, to some extent, we all went through it, some more than
I
others.
see it as an investment of time and resources. So we'll look at it like that.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we appreciate your support. Uh, when you subscribe, it really helps us out. So please don't hesitate to do that, and we will see you next week. for the next edition of the Superpower Logic podcast. Thank you, Kelly, as always. Appreciate you.